And there's one story that Swamiji tells in the New Path about a sister disciple, Dayamata. And Dayamata told him this story, that when she was new on the path, she was still a teenager, and she said at first that Yogananda treated her lovingly, like a daughter. But once her feet were planted firmly on the path, however, he began to teach her the superior merits of impersonal love. And one evening, at his hermitage in Encinitas, Yogananda addressed her in a way that seemed to her to be aloof, even stern. And she was upset. She went outside and she prayed deeply for understanding. And at last she reached a firm resolution. She vowed, "Divine Mother, from now on I will love only you. In beholding him, I will see you alone, in him." Suddenly, she felt as though a great weight had been lifted. Later, she went indoors and knelt before Master for his blessing. This time, he greeted her gently, saying, "Very good." From then on, he showed himself once more affectionate to her. Now, however, their relationship was on a deeper level, for the disciple saw him at last in that impersonal light in which he beheld himself. And it's very interesting, this way of loving impersonally as opposed to an overly personal and overly self-centered way. And this too Swamiji lived, and Swamiji taught all of us in different ways to try to make our love, our friendship, more impersonal. And knowing him, knowing Swamiji for 40 years, being his secretary for 7 years, sometimes people ask me questions like, "Oh, you must have been alone with him many times. Did he give you secret teachings? Did he give you spiritual experiences?" And as I say, the friendship was not like that, not on an ego level, but more impersonal. And at first I had the desire to serve Swamiji in some personal way, some little ways beyond what the service I was doing in our cottage industries. And I wrote him once about that. And he started to find small things that I could do for him, to bring his firewood in every day in the winter and maybe light a fire for him. And then I would drive with him to the satsang he would give every Sunday, and maybe I would make his breakfast that morning or iron his robe, do something to prepare him. And then some years later, 5 years later, when he asked me to be a secretary, I think our relationship had changed a great deal. It was much more impersonal, on a higher spiritual level. And he had said later that he felt that I was his best secretary over the years because I was able to remove myself, get myself out of the way. When I was writing letters for him, I wouldn't insert my personality as much as I would try to have his vibration shine through the letter as much as I could. And after those years, he invited me to go to Europe to help start our retreat center there. Not because I don't think that he was dissatisfied with the work I was doing as a secretary, but more that he could see that I needed to grow in other ways, that for my growth I needed to learn to serve people more directly and do more teaching and be trained more as a teacher. And so perhaps it was a personal sacrifice for him, but he could see that what was more important is what was best spiritually for the individual. And I noticed also how this kind of impersonal friendship reflected itself in other ways. Swamiji would often spend time not with the people that he was perhaps most in tune with, that he could share ideas with, but also just as much he would spend time with the people who most needed help. Perhaps they were the more difficult people to be around. I remember one instance of one woman in the Ananda community, and by nature she was very bossy. She would insert herself into other people's business, and I think everyone had some story to relate of how this woman had upset them personally. And yet Swamiji was so patient. When we were so irritated by her, he kept showing friendship, patience. He would even go out of his way to invite her to, be with him in a small group, even travel with him. And I'm sure that, in fact, I saw many times how she would behave badly with him and impose herself on him in many different ways. And after a good number of years, 10, 15 years of acting in this way, she gradually improved and she gained more confidence in herself. And she too could practice this more unemotional, impersonal kind of friendship. And she found constructive areas to devote her energies. And I saw similarly Swamiji working with many other people who had particular problems, and he would befriend them, rather than sit them down and tell them what their problems were. He would be a friend. He would include them in times when other people wouldn't include them. He would listen to them at times when those same people would irritate others, and other people tended not to want to listen to that person. And time after time I saw Swamiji act this way with people, and most often that person changed. That person acquired the spiritual qualities that they never seemed to have before. And a few times those people left the path, but I'm sure in their hearts there's always the memory of their friendship with Swamiji and what he had given to them. And I said his friendship was divine and impersonal, but also where there was a particular need, he would also help directly, often in mysterious ways, often in ways where no one actually asked for help outwardly. I remember one friend of mine, and she had recently moved to Ananda village. This was in the early years, and she, like most of us, were living very primitively. And she was a single mother. She had 2 young children, and it was difficult for her to live in such a way. And yet she, in her heart, she knew that she had made the right decision. But she was new, she hadn't really made other friends yet, and it was Christmas time. And her children had gone away to spend Christmas with their father. And she had come from a large Catholic family, and Christmas was the most special time of the year growing up. And here she was, feeling like she was all alone, and she was on her way to a satsang with Swamiji at Christmas. And it snowed. She could no longer drive to the satsang. She had to walk for most of an hour through the snow to get to Swamiji's. And this thought came to her that as she was walking, that she knew she was doing the right thing. She knew she was on the right path. At the same time, she just kind of felt a little lonely and feeling like the image came to her of, it would be nice just, to have someone to hold my hand. And that image of holding her hand came to her. When she arrived at Swamiji's house, Swamiji was there at the door greeting everyone who was coming for the satsang. And he greeted her, and then he said to her, come and stand beside me. And he had her stand beside him as he greeted everyone coming in, and he held her hand for the whole time, maybe another 10 minutes, that all of the other visitors had entered the door. And then he never said anything. He just went to lead the satsang. And yet this inner desire of her heart was fulfilled in such a simple but beautiful way. There was a time that Asha described where she herself was going through a difficult period, and normally she probably would have talked to Swamiji and asked him for advice perhaps. But he was in seclusion, a strict seclusion where he was all alone in his house, and she knew that it was important not to disturb him. And yet Swamiji had heard through someone else that Asha was going through a difficult time, and he had sent the message for her to come over. And he was in silence, he wasn't speaking, and yet he wrote a note to her and asked her what was going on. And then at the end of it, when he helped her out, she said that I'm so sorry that I had to disturb your seclusion, that I was the cause of your coming out of your seclusion and this interruption. And Swamiji wrote a note. He would type on his typewriter, and she could see the message on the typewriter. And he wrote, "You insult our friendship." And he explained that by not coming to him. As he put it, I wouldn't want my convenience to ever be more important than someone else's need. And this friendship to him was paramount. And as I say, rather than being on an emotional, personal, needy, selfish level, it was a divine friendship. How can I help my friend grow spiritually? How can we reach new heights together? And so it's a very fine line. You know, I say that his friendship was impersonal on a divine level, that it was really God's love that was being channeled through him, his guru's love that was being channeled to us. You know, at the same time, this love and friendship was delivered in a very direct way to each individual where there was need. But as I said, you know, he would spend time with people who were needy. And then there were others, you know, for instance, Swami Jyotish, his spiritual successor. And you would think that he would have spent a lot of time with Jyotish, training him for such an important mission. Instead, Jyotish did not see that much of Swamiji. There were not that many times that Swamiji and Jyotish worked together very closely, you know, day after day. You know, generally it was maybe every week or two, Swamiji might see Jyotish in a group with other people. Swami Jaya, you know, the co-director of Ananda Sangha India, you know, an important mission and also another very spiritually advanced soul. And he said he remembers that perhaps twice in the 40 years that he knew Swamiji, 45 years that he knew Swamiji, perhaps twice he actually spoke alone with Swamiji. That, you know, he only asked him a couple of questions in all of those years because Jyotish and Jaya were already in tune. They didn't need that constant attention, that constant energy from Swamiji to help them, because they were already tuning in on that higher level of friendship. And I remember myself, once I was with Swamiji regularly, and yet I sort of felt in meditation, I felt to experiment. And I said, let me pray to Swamiji. And you know, there's this question that I'm wondering about, and in my meditation, I inwardly asked that question. And I did this with several questions. And then what would happen? I would open a book of Swamiji or of Master, and there was the answer that I was seeking to that question. The next time I met Swamiji, out of the blue, he would say something, and there was another answer that I had asked and I didn't know the answer to. And this is something that each of us can do, to tune in inwardly to Swamiji, to Master, and this inner connection, this inner communion is far more important than any outer contact. And you know, we who lived with Swamiji, perhaps we needed those years of extra training. And those who have come to these teachings after Swamiji's passing, I think that you're more advanced, that you didn't need that hand-holding that we needed, that intuitively you recognize the depth of these teachings without having to be shown quite so literally as we had. And you also have many, many blessings that we did not have. When I met Swamiji, he had written 3 little booklets, and I had read 2 of those booklets, and on the basis of that I came to Ananda village. And he had just finished writing his first real book, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga. Only that one book. At that time also Yogananda had written the Autobiography of a Yogi. That was available. And then a couple of other books, but nothing major. There were no recordings of his discourses or of Swamiji's discourses or of Swamiji's 400 plus pieces of music. They just didn't exist. And Yoganandaji's discourses that were later transcribed in Man's Eternal Quest and other books, none of those books existed. And so it's rather like we had to intuit those teachings and learn them directly from Swamiji. But now we have so many resources that we can draw on. And so we are indeed very blessed to have so many avenues for spiritual growth at our fingertips. Bless you all.